The Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board has a short but somewhat turbulent history. One chairman was forced out for mismanagement. Another resigned early because the White House proposed getting rid of the board altogether. More recently, things have stabilized. In the latest Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey scores, engagement at the Chemical Safety Board rose by 29%, so we decided to get an update, and I'm joined now by the chairman, Steve Owens. Mr. Owens, good to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
And let's begin just by maybe a quick review of what the Chemical Safety Board, the CSB, actually does.
Well, that's a great question. The Chemical Safety Board, actually the official name is the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, which is a mouthful, but it's probably the most important agency that most people have never heard of in the federal government. But our mission is to investigate chemical accidents and hazards that result from the production, processing, and handling of chemical substances at facilities. Now, those are because the Chemical Safety Board was created as part of the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments. Our mission is focused on what are called stationary sources, basically things that don't move. So if it's a refinery or production facility, or in some cases, even a pipeline, we have authority to investigate it. If it's moving items, such as the train that derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, earlier this year, we don't have jurisdiction over that. That's the NTSB. We also, in our statute and our regulations, you'll focus on specific types of incidents and more categorical in terms of whether there's a fatality, a serious injury, or substantial property damage. So we have to look at a variety of factors when we deploy to a scene to investigate something that has gone wrong.
Sure. So maybe the closest parallel would be the National Transportation Safety Board, that you kind of mobilize and go there when something happens, because plants do blow up once in a while.
They catch on fire too, sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, the NTSB is a great analogy. And in fact, the CSB was modeled on the NTSB when it was created back in 1990. Now, they're a different entity. They're much larger. They have 10 times as many employees and 10 times as much money as we do, and a very, very, very broad jurisdiction. And we work very closely with them. But the way our relationship with the NTSB works is if they determine that they have jurisdiction over a matter, then we step back. But sometimes we will both go into an accident investigation unsure of what the cause is or exactly who is supposed to be in charge, and then we work that out as things move forward.
All right. And you are classified by OPM in the FEV scores and generally as a very small agency. How many people work there?
Well, as of today, we have 41 employees. A couple of more are starting right at the end of calendar year 23. And then there's a couple of more that we've made offers to, who have accepted and are going through the onboarding process, background checks, things like that. So by early next year, we'll be up to around 45 or so. And our hope and goal is during this fiscal year 24, that by the end of the fiscal year, we'll be up around, if not above, 50 employees. It doesn't sound like much compared to other agencies where I worked, for example, like EPA, where I worked during the Obama administration. But for the CSB, that's a big deal. When our previous chairperson resigned at the end of July of 2022, we had 30 employees at the time. So some people have left. The chairperson left. A couple of her political appointees left. So we've had some departures, but we've hired a lot of people since that time. And the agency is really, as we like to say, we're in the process of rebuilding and revitalizing the agency.
Sure.
And the agency is really beginning to move forward in a very positive way.
And there is an appointed board, but I imagine the bulk of the staff has some technical expertise in different areas of chemical safety and chemical processing behavior and chemical effects.
Absolutely. The majority of the employees at the CSB right now, and as it will be going forward, are individuals who work in our Office of Investigations and Recommendations, and many of them, in fact, almost all of them, are chemical engineers. They have chemical engineering degrees, some undergraduate degrees, but some both undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in chemical engineering. We have some attorneys on staff in our Office of General Counsel. We also have a number of administrative staff who are mostly focused in the Washington, D.C. area. There are probably about a dozen or so, as of this point, administrative staff that we have. But again, the majority of the individuals who work at the CSB are chemical engineers or people with very significant technical skills, because what they have to do is go out and look at a a refinery or a chemical production facility that's had an explosion or a fire or some other major catastrophe occur, and piecing it all together to figure out what went wrong.
We're speaking with Steve Owens. He's chairman of the Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board. And you personally have a history of managing environmental organizations, EPA, and also in the state of Arizona. So the scores, the employee engagement global satisfaction scores went up 28%. Engagement score went up 29% in the most recent survey. What have you done there, do you think, to make people feel more engaged? What's changed?
Thank you for asking about that, Tom, because that's something that we're very proud of when those results came out. When I became it's kind of a funny term, but the interim executive, which was essentially the acting chair when our former chairperson, then I was confirmed as the full chair in December of 2022. But morale at the agency was very low. People were fairly disheartened because of a lot of things, not the least of which you mentioned when the former president had tried to abolish it. And that'll give you something to think about if you're working at an agency. The president zeroes out your budget. But there were a lot of other things that were going on under the previous leadership at the agency. And so we've done a number of different things. I think from a global perspective, the most important thing is you treat employees with respect. You listen to them. You recognize that these are very talented and dedicated career employees, some of whom have been at the agency a long time. And so when Sylvia Johnson, who was the other board member who was confirmed at the time I was in early 22, when I first came on the board, when we first joined the CSB, we spent some time doing kind of get to know you sessions. Our staff is scattered all across the country. We have some in DC, but the majority of the staff at the CSB are not in DC. They're all across the United States. We even have a staff person in Alaska. So we did these virtual get to know you sessions, which were very, very, very important, mostly talking to people about who they are, what their background is, what their families are, what their families are like, rather, and what they care about. And then after the change in leadership, we sort of did a go back and did a how you doing, series of sessions with people just to see what was on their mind. And that was very helpful to board member Johnson and myself in that regard. And then we've got a new board member, Kathy Sandoval, who joined us in February of 2023. She's been very active in terms of communicating with the staff as well. But from a process point of view, I think the most important stuff we did was sort of make clear what our priorities are for the agency, to give some direction to the staff, set expectations, and hold people accountable, but then get out of their way. I learned in the time that I've been doing these kinds of jobs, as you indicated, I was the director of the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality when Janet Napolitano was our governor, and then during the Obama administration, I was head of the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. And even way before that, I started my career working for Al Gore. I'm originally from Tennessee, and I was on his staff in D.C. in both the House and Senate, but I was his chief of staff in the state of Tennessee. We had slightly under 20 staff scattered all across the state of Tennessee. So and this was back in the 1980s with all our offices when he was in the Senate. So essentially, we were all kind of working virtually at that point anyway, because I had to spend a lot of time on the telephone or getting in the car and driving to Memphis or Jackson, Tennessee, or Knoxville or Chattanooga or the Tri-Cities or wherever, to try to manage a staff that wasn't all in one place. So I learned a lot about how to do things right and learned a lot about what not to do when you're a manager through those positions. I've been very, very fortunate in my life in that regard.
My guest is Steve Owens, chairman of the Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, and you were telling us some of the changes you've made to make employees more satisfied at work.
The other thing is when I became the acting chairperson, and then when we had the change in leadership, we did a number of things to get rid of a lot of the bureaucracy. I mean, it seems sort of hard to talk about or unusual to talk about a very small agency without that many people having a large bureaucracy, but we certainly did at that time. I had never seen so much bureaucracy in terms of making people's jobs more difficult than they ought to be, in terms of the way things had to be reported up, the way things had to be cleared, the number of people who had to sign off on things, including investigation reports, and just the paperwork. And
paperwork is one thing, but also the sense that people have no discretion over their area of expertise, right. I think may be the fundamental factor there.
Well, and you kind of read my mind. That was the next thing I was going to mention, was that while we were doing that, you want to get rid of the bureaucracy and stop looking over their shoulders and not micromanage them, which is certainly what was going on when I came on the board from the